So let's go ahead and finish up. We are on the back side, and we are on the section that says the end of the war in Western Europe. So it turns out that we get involved with the war, and our president at the time is this guy named Woodrow Wilson. And we'll write down that he ended, you'll write down American neutrality. He ended American neutrality. Neutrality is Neutrality. So it turns out that on the handout, one of the reasons we went to war is something called the Zimmerman Telegraph. We basically, it says on the handout, intercepted communication with Germany, encouraging Mexico to attack the United States. What happened was Germany sent a telegram to Mexico and said, hey, wouldn't you guys want New Mexico and Texas and Arizona and everything else back? Tell you what, Mexico, if you attack the US, we, Germany, will back you up. We'll support you. We'll take care of you. And now, honestly, is Mexico in a place to do that? What was Mexico doing like 1917? Do you remember they were busy doing something? They were doing what? They had like the Mexican revolt, like they were literally fighting each other. Like a million Mexicans died. They're not in a position, even if they weren't, to invade the United States. So this was never going to happen, but it still kind of upset us that they were like, Germany was asking Mexico to invade us. So all of this kind of pushes us, our ship sank, the Lusitania, Americans were killed. We're friends with Britain anyway. So it was just really a matter of time before we jumped in to join the war. And it says on the handout that fresh American troops tipped the balance in favor of the Allies. Because you know what? Everyone was exhausted. Everyone was tired. And so we jumped in and we joined the war just in the nick of time. In fact, this war is going to end in 1918. It will be on the far right on November 11th at 11 a.m. on the 11th day of the 11th month at the 11th hour. We'll write down in 1918, the war ended. On the 11th day, the 11th month, the 11th hour, in 1918, the war ended. So what do we do now? Well, Woodrow Wilson, our president, he wants to try to make it so that we don't have a world war ever again. And Woodrow Wilson's point of view is the war happened, it got out of control, because countries didn't have a place to talk out their problems. So Woodrow Wilson said, wouldn't it be cool if there was like an international club that all countries were a part of, and we could talk, we could argue, we could debate, we could do the things we need to do. Let's form this group. And this group, there's a group like this similar to this today. What is that group called today? The United Nations today. But that's not what this group was called. It says on the handout, there was a group that he wanted us to join called you'll write down, the League of Nations. He wanted to join the League of Nations. The problem was most Americans didn't want to do that. Most Americans said, I don't really know about that. I don't want to join some group. Like, I don't want anyone to tell us what to do. Like, I'm fine just us being America. We got involved with this Europe's war, and I don't want to be part of anything else. So even though Woodrow Wilson came up with the idea, we don't join the League of Nations. And think about this for a second. If there's a club and all the important countries are a part of it, but this new, really powerful country, the United States, doesn't join, can that group be really successful? Like imagine we had NHS, National Honor Society, and no kids in AP classes join NHS. Is that NHS group going to be really solid? No. So what happens if there's this club called the League of Nations and the US, one of the most new, powerful countries on the planet, says, yeah, but we're not going to join? Like, that club's not going to be very successful. It says on the handout, it sets up its future, you'll write down, failure. because we don't join the League of Nations, it's going to help set up future failure. On the next line, it says 14 points. There are 14 points that Woodrow Wilson believes should help guide us after World War II. And one, we'll write down where it says 14 points. I want you to write down the term self-determination of nations. I want you to write down where it says 14 points. One of the points Woodrow Wilson believed in was self-determination of nations. In other words, Woodrow Wilson thought every country should be able to decide for themselves their future. Every nation should be able to be independent if they wanted to. They should have self-determination of nations. Well, going to the impact of the war death toll. We're not 100% sure, but we're going to write down for death toll somewhere between 8 to 10 million people died. Now that's terrible. That's bad, and it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. 8 to 10 million died. The number of wounded we'll write down was 20 million. That's a lot of people injured. And then I have like various countries. We're going to write down the death toll per country. We're going to write down Germany lost 2 million. Russia lost 1.7. France lost 1.7. This is millions, I'm telling you. Austria lost 1.5. The British Empire lost 1 million. And then look at the US. Now, we jumped in 1917. We jumped in the last year. What's probably going to be true of our number? Low. In fact, everyone's averaging about 1 to 2 million. How many Americans died? 115,000. Now, that's terrible, but compared to everyone else, how did we do? We did pretty good. On the handout, after World War I, we also see mass migrations to the U.S. We write down 1 million move. 1 million people come to the United States. That's a lot of people. A lot of people say, hey, I want to get the heck out of Europe. It's kind of crazy. But something else moves as well. And on this map, on the screen, the red lines represent troop movements in World War I. And it turns out people are getting on boats. People are getting on trains. You have people from Australia to Africa, Africa to Europe, India to it's everywhere. And what's the one thing we've learned that often moves with people like this? Disease. And what we're going to write down on the handout is that influenza, this brand new disease, a form of the flu, it was called Spanish flu. We're going to write down that 1/4 of the globe got infected. Now, that's a lot of people. Like 1/4 of the globe got infected. That's a lot of people. And this is the last pandemic before the one that we're in right now. They're in a pandemic. This is the last pandemic. This is actually worse than what we have now because 1/4 of the planet has not been sick. In fact, take a look at the handout. How many people died? How many people died in this pandemic? We want to write down 30 million. Coronavirus, where are we at now? Globally. I think, I don't know by memory, I think we're probably about 2 million globally. And it's changed the world, right? This disease, the Spanish flu, killed 30 million people. And it's been about almost every 100 years there's a pandemic. This was in 1918. We're in 2021. It's about 100 years, about every 100 years. And it's kind of interesting because I've worked at LaPorte for almost 20 years. And almost every year we get to this lesson, and I've told my students, you know, it's only a matter of time before we have another pandemic. And every year I'm like, you know what? It's almost going to be time for another pandemic. And we were 2 years late, but it was time for another pandemic. 1918. So there's various ones. I have this handout that I can give us that like tracks all the big plagues. In fact, we'll write down, there was in India alone, write down 20 million in India alone. Sadly, if you watch the news, India right now is getting hit hard by coronavirus. They're having a second/third wave, and most of the deaths on planet Earth right now are coronavirus are in India. Their hospitals are being shut down. Like, for a lot of you, it's not bad. It's like, oh, I was sick, no big deal. Some kids like, oh, I had a headache one day, I had coronavirus. But really, elderly people get hit really hard. And the problem is when the hospitals get overwhelmed, that's what's happening in India right now. Now, after World War I, we have peace treaties, and sadly, it says on the handout, non-European voices, we'll write down, they were ignored. In other words, like when they're trying to like figure out, well, how are we going to live? You know, what's it going to be like after World War I? It says they kind of ignored non-European voices. They didn't ask, hey, Africa, what do you think? Hey, India, what's your thoughts? Woodrow Wilson, again, here's that phrase. He believed in self-determination, and the League of Nations, he believed that people may now be dominated and governed only by their own consent. By their own consent. He didn't believe that you could be able to invade or beat someone up or to conquer. He thought, you know what? People need to actually have chosen their government. That's what Woodrow Wilson believed in. But we'll write down, with American isolationism, after World War I, we're like, okay, we went to like the global party and we're not really into it. We're just going to stay home now. And so for American isolationism, we're going to actually write down again, we don't join the League of Nations. We do not join the League of Nations. Because we do go to World War I, but we're like, you know what? There's a lot of drama in the world. I'm just going to stay home, the United States says. The treaty that ended the war is called the Treaty of Versailles. And there's a word next to that. It has the word reparations. And this treaty basically said, I think we should punish Germany for starting the war. Now, Germany was definitely part of the war, but I don't know if you can say Germany was like uniquely at fault. I think in various ways, everyone was kind of at fault. Like everyone jumped to this war. How do you just pick Germany and say like they're the cause of the fight? Well, this treaty had a really bad thing in it. This word reparations, what that means is that Germany should, you'll write down, pay for the entire war. Germany should pay for the entire war. Now, honestly, is that fair? I'm going to say no. Like, yeah, Germany was part of it, but guess what? Everyone was irresponsible. Germany is supposed to pay for the cost of everyone's war. That is a punishment that is humiliating. It's unfair. It's not balanced. And guess what? It's going to make Germans want to have revenge. World War II begins because World War I ended so unfairly. Adolf Hitler doesn't take a lot to convince people. Who here thinks that we were taking advantage of World War I? Oh, you do? Everyone? Okay. How would you guys like to take revenge on the people who punished us unjustly? Well, yeah, sign me up for that. Finally, it says on the handout, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, well, it breaks up and new nations form, like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia. The empire breaks up and new nations form. So remember the problem of nationalism? It's too great for Austria to overcome. All right, with that, we are done. We're going to go ahead and collect our stuff and turn it in for a grade.